What happens when one of Hollywood's most admired figures, a man who spent decades fighting impossible battles with grace and courage, walks into what should be a celebration, only to be blindsided by a host with an agenda? What happens when compassion meets cruelty, and a man who's inspired millions finds himself accused of exploitation on live television? This is that moment when Michael J. Fox, the legend, the fighter, the man who turned personal tragedy into global hope, finally reached his limit. It wasn't just another awkward celebrity interview. It was the day Joy Behar learned what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. What unfolded on The View that day would become one of the most talked about confrontations in daytime TV history, an explosion of truth and restraint colliding in real time. The calm before the storm. The setup was meant to be heartwarming. Producers envisioned an uplifting conversation, a chance to highlight Fox's latest advocacy efforts, his foundation's breakthroughs in Parkinson's research, and a few reflections on his storied career. Every detail was planned for comfort and respect: soft lighting, cozy seating, flattering camera angles. The studio buzzed with genuine anticipation. The audience whispered fondly about Back to the Future and family ties. Many had watched Fox battle Parkinson's with humor and resolve. Their admiration filled the air. Even the seasoned crew, usually unfazed by celebrity guests, seemed sincerely excited. Sound checks ran twice, cameras were tested thrice, and producers rehearsed every beat of the segment to ensure a smooth, positive show. Whoopi Goldberg reviewed notes on Fox's foundation, eager to spotlight his accomplishments. Sunny Hostin prepared thoughtful questions about the latest medical breakthroughs. Sarah Haynes gathered heartwarming stories of people whose lives had changed thanks to Fox's work. It was supposed to be a celebration, but Joy Behar sat apart, quiet, focused, her expression sharp rather than warm. She scanned her notes with a deliberate intensity, the kind that hinted not at curiosity but calculation. While others prepared to honor their guest, Joy seemed to be sharpening her knives. The entrance. When Michael J. Fox stepped through the studio doors, the crowd erupted. The applause wasn't polite. It was thunderous, heartfelt, a roar of affection for a man who had spent his career lifting spirits, even as his own challenges grew. Some audience members stood, others wiped tears from their eyes. Fox smiled, that familiar, easy grin that had brightened screens for decades. His movements were careful. Parkinson's had altered his gait, but his composure remained unshakable. Every step radiated quiet strength. Whoopi rose to greet him with a warm embrace. Sarah reached out, smiling broadly, while Sunny offered a handshake that revealed genuine admiration. Joy Behar, however, stayed seated. Her smile was thin, her eyes cool. She gave a curt nod, polite but distant. She flipped through her note cards as if preparing for a debate rather than a conversation. Fox, ever gracious, either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. He lowered himself into the guest chair, his posture relaxed, his demeanor as open as always. The interview begins. "Michael, welcome back to The View," Whoopi said brightly. "It's always such a pleasure to have you here. You look fantastic." "Thank you," Fox replied, his voice carrying the same warmth that had made audiences love him for decades. "It's great to be back with all of you." In that instant, the room felt light, the way it should have been all along. But underneath the surface, tension coiled. Producers in the control room smiled, believing everything was going perfectly. They had no idea that one host had decided to take the segment off script. Joy Behar shuffled her notes, waiting for her turn to speak, waiting for the moment she could steer the conversation toward controversy. What she didn't realize was that Michael J. Fox, for all his politeness and restraint, had faced tougher battles than any televised ambush could deliver. And when that moment came, when kindness finally met provocation head-on, the outcome would leave an entire studio stunned into silence and redefine what it means to push a good man too far. The conversation began on a gentle, uplifting note, the kind of warm exchange that talk shows dream of capturing. Sunny Hostin led with genuine curiosity, asking Michael J. Fox about his foundation's recent progress. Instantly, the actor's eyes lit up, his face animated with passion. He spoke with conviction about the breakthroughs in Parkinson's research, about the scientists and doctors who were, as he put it, getting tantalizingly close to treatments that could change everything. "The science has come so far," he said, his voice steady but filled with a kind of hard-earned optimism. "We're not talking about distant dreams anymore. We're seeing real progress. Clinical trials are showing results. I truly believe we'll see major breakthroughs in the next decade." The sincerity in his tone was impossible to miss. Sarah Haynes leaned forward, visibly moved. "Your foundation has raised over $1 billion for research," she said, her voice tinged with admiration. "That's incredible, Michael. How does it feel knowing you've made such an impact?" Michael smiled, modest as ever. "It's not about me," he replied. "It's about the researchers, the donors, the people who keep believing. I'm just lucky to help bring them together," the audience murmured in appreciation. The camera panned across smiling faces, capturing the warmth that filled the studio. It was the kind of television that inspired, hopeful, human, and deeply moving. And then, the air shifted. Joy Behar leaned forward, her voice cutting through the pleasant energy like a cold breeze through an open door. "Well, Michael," she began, her tone suddenly sharp, "let's talk about something else for a minute." The studio's atmosphere changed in an instant. The other co-hosts exchanged quick, uneasy glances. Whoopi Goldberg's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly, the silent signal of a host sensing trouble. Sunny straightened in her chair, clearly uncomfortable. Even the audience quieted, the tension palpable. "I have to ask," Joy continued, ignoring the mood shift, "about some of the political positions you've taken over the years." Michael's polite smile didn't waver, but there was a subtle tightening in his expression, a flicker of caution. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said calmly. "I try to focus on health advocacy rather than politics." Joy wasn't satisfied. If anything, his restraint seemed to embolden her. She leaned back, her tone taking on a condescending edge. "Oh, come on, Michael. You've been pretty vocal about certain issues. Some people say you use your condition to push an agenda." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Even the audience stopped breathing for a moment. The warmth that had filled the studio just minutes before was gone, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence. Whoopi opened her mouth to step in, but Joy pressed forward, voice growing harder. "Let's be honest," she said. "You've gotten a lot of sympathy over the years. Some critics think you've leveraged that for political gain." Michael's jaw tightened. His hands, which had been resting calmly on the chair, tensed. Still, he didn't lose composure. "Joy, I think you're mischaracterizing what I do," he said, his tone still controlled, but now edged with quiet steel. "When I talk about healthcare or research funding, it's because these things matter to millions, not just me." Joy leaned in again. "But you have to admit your celebrity gives you influence, and you've used that influence to support causes some Americans disagree with." The other hosts shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's smile was gone. Sunny stared down at her notes. The tension was suffocating. Whoopi finally intervened, her voice calm but firm. "Joy, maybe we can get back to Michael's foundation work," she suggested, offering an escape for everyone involved. But Joy refused to let go. "No, I think this is important," she said briskly, waving off the attempt. "Michael, you've appeared in political ads, made public statements. You can't just hide behind your foundation when it's convenient." Michael took a breath, the first visible crack in his patience showing. His voice was calm, but each word landed with precision. "I'm not hiding behind anything, Joy," he said evenly. "I'm using my voice to advocate for medical research and healthcare access. If that's controversial to you, maybe we just value different things." Joy crossed her arms. "What's controversial," she shot back, "is when celebrities think their personal struggles give them special authority to tell the rest of us what to believe. You're an actor, not a policy expert." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that fills every corner of a room. The audience sat frozen. Even the crew behind the cameras looked uneasy, sensing that something irreversible had just happened. Michael sat back slowly, his hands clasped together, eyes steady. The calm mask was still there, but underneath it was a warning. Enough was enough. "Joy," Michael said slowly, his voice calm but edged with unmistakable steel. The quiet authority in his tone sliced through the tension-filled studio, I've been living with Parkinson's for over 30 years. I've worked alongside doctors, researchers, and policymakers around the world. I think that gives me a little insight into these issues. Joy leaned forward, mistaking his restraint for weakness. That's exactly my point, she said, triumphant and careless. You've turned your personal situation into a career. Some might even call that exploitation. The word hit the air like a slap. Something in Michael's expression shifted. The polite, practiced smile that had carried him through decades of interviews vanished. His eyes, normally warm and gentle, hardened with a fire no one expected to see from him. The quiet man of grace and humility was gone. What sat before Joy now was someone who had been pushed too far. Exploitation? Michael repeated softly. The low tone made his words more powerful than any shout. Joy, I think you need to be very careful about what you're suggesting. The other hosts froze. Whoopi's hand hovered over the desk, ready to step in. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear. Sunny sat stiff, her face pale. Everyone in that studio knew Joy had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But Joy didn't stop. She smirked, waving her hand dismissively. I'm just saying what a lot of people are thinking, she said, oblivious to the storm she was provoking. You've built an entire second career on being sick. The foundation, the speaking tours, the endorsements, it's all tied to your condition. Michael's hands, usually steady despite his illness, clenched into fists. The patience that had carried him through decades of public life was being tested like never before. My foundation, he said evenly, has funded research that's helped millions of people around the world. If you call that exploitation, then you clearly don't understand what we're doing. Oh, I understand perfectly, Joy shot back, her tone dripping with arrogance. You've built this saint-like image of yourself, the brave celebrity fighting disease. And nobody dares question you because you're sick. It's clever marketing, really. The audience gasped, an audible collective intake of breath. Even through the microphones you could hear the disbelief. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Joy Behar had gone too far, and everyone knew it but her, yet she kept going. And let's not forget those political ads, she continued recklessly. You standing there shaking, making people feel sorry for you so they'll vote a certain way. Some might call that emotional manipulation. That was it. Michael stood abruptly, his chair rolling back with a loud scrape that cut through the silence. For a heartbeat, the studio was frozen, cameras humming, lights buzzing, as the reality of what had just happened settled over everyone. Enough, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of 3 decades of endurance, pain, and dignity. I came here to talk about hope, about research, about the future we're building for people living with this disease. But you've turned this into something ugly. The room was silent except for the soft crackle of studio equipment. Joy opened her mouth again, still deluded by her own self-righteousness. I'm just asking the tough questions, Michael. Isn't that what journalism is? Michael let out a short, bitter laugh, one completely devoid of humor. Journalism, he repeated. This isn't journalism, Joy, this is theater. You're not asking questions, you're performing, and you're doing it at my expense. Whoopi tried to step in, her voice calm but urgent. Michael, please, let's take a breath. No, Whoopi, he said firmly, though his tone toward her remained respectful. You've done nothing wrong. But Joy needs to hear this. He turned back to his accuser. You want to talk about exploitation? Let's talk about a talk show host who thinks attacking a guest with a chronic illness makes for good television. Joy's face flushed crimson. I'm not attacking you because you're sick, she snapped. I'm questioning your motives. My motives? Michael's voice trembled now, not with rage, but with raw human emotion. My motive is to find a cure for a disease that affects over 10 million people. My motive is to give hope to families who are watching someone they love slowly disappear. What exactly are your motives, Joy? The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. The entire studio seemed to lean forward, waiting. Joy fidgeted in her seat, the false confidence finally slipping from her voice. My motive, she stammered, is to have an honest conversation without all the celebrity worship. Michael stared at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with disbelief. Celebrity worship, he repeated quietly. The words tasted bitter on his tongue, because for the first time that morning, Everyone in that room knew exactly who the real performance was coming from. Michael shook his head slowly, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "Joy," he said, his voice steady but heavy with exhaustion. "I've been transparent about my condition for over 30 years. I've shared my struggles, my fears, my worst days, not for sympathy, but for understanding. I've let cameras see what Parkinson's really looks like so people could learn, not pity." "And you call that exploitation?" The air in the studio thickened. Sarah leaned forward, trying to ease the tension. "Michael, we all have tremendous respect for what you've done." "Do you, Sarah?" he interrupted, his tone softening only slightly as he turned toward her. He knew she wasn't part of the ambush. "Because your colleague here just accused me of building a career on being sick, of manipulating emotions for political gain." "Is that what respect looks like?" Joy bristled, refusing to stay silent. "I never said you built your career on being sick. You were already famous when you were diagnosed. Then what exactly are you saying, Joy?" Michael's calm had turned razor sharp. His presence filled the room, not through anger but through sheer moral authority. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're suggesting that everything I've done since my diagnosis, every dollar raised, every life helped, is dishonest or self-serving." Joy straightened, trying to reclaim ground she had already lost. "I'm saying you've used your platform beyond advocacy. You've endorsed candidates, taken political positions." Michael took a deliberate step toward her side of the desk. Not threatening, but commanding. "So, what really bothers you is that I don't share your political opinions." "This isn't about journalism, Joy. It's about silencing someone who disagrees with you." "That's not true," Joy protested weakly, but even she seemed unsure. "Isn't it?" Michael pressed, his voice tightening with restrained power. "If this were about accountability, you'd have done your research. You'd know my foundation's finances are public. You'd know every grant we fund is peer-reviewed and published in medical journals. Every cent is accounted for." Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Michael didn't give her the chance. His voice grew stronger, carrying years of suppressed frustration and unspoken truth. "But you didn't do that homework. Instead, you came here to score points, to provoke a reaction from a man with a chronic illness on national television. That's not courage, Joy. That's cruelty." The studio was silent except for the faint hum of the cameras. Even the audience seemed to stop breathing. The tremor in Michael's voice wasn't from disease this time. It was emotion, deep and raw. "You know what the real tragedy is?" he continued. "Right now, researchers around the world are working 18-hour days trying to cure diseases like this. Families are praying for hope, for progress, for something to believe in. And instead of helping spread that message, you've used this moment to tear it all down. For ratings." Joy's posture faltered. For the first time, she looked genuinely unsure. "Michael, I think maybe we should—" "No, Joy," he said firmly, cutting her off. "You don't get to retreat now. You accuse me of exploitation and manipulation. Those are serious accusations, and the audience deserves to hear you defend them." Joy's eyes darted toward her co-hosts, searching for backup that didn't come. Whoopi's face was tense. Sarah looked stricken. Sunny stared down at the desk, mortified. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably, heads shaking, whispers spreading. The tide had turned completely. "I was just trying to ask tough questions," Joy said weakly. "Tough questions?" Michael repeated, disbelief in his voice. "A tough question would be about research ethics, funding, or accountability. What you did was launch personal attacks and call it journalism." Whoopi finally spoke up. "Michael, I think what Joy was trying to—" But Michael raised a hand, respectful, firm. "Whoopi, I appreciate you trying to mediate. But there's no defense for this. Joy made a choice, to attack my character instead of discuss the cause." The cameras caught Joy's face, red, shaken, the confidence gone. The woman who had started this exchange with smug certainty now looked small, realizing too late how far she'd gone. "I never meant to attack you personally," she whispered. "But you did," Michael replied evenly. "You questioned my integrity, my motives, my life's work. And you did it in front of millions of people." "That's personal," Sarah finally broke her silence. "Michael, everyone here recognizes what you've done for people with Parkinson's. We truly do." Michael gave her a sad smile, a rare flicker of warmth in a room frozen by shame. "I appreciate that, Sarah, but the damage is done. This show just suggested that my work, my fight, is built on deception, and that hurts more than you'll ever understand." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like judgment itself had settled over the set. Joy stared down at her hands, her voice barely audible. I didn't realize how that sounded." Michael nodded once. "You just did." And with that, the man who'd spent half his life teaching the world about grace under pressure reminded everyone watching that decency, even when challenged, always wins. "I didn't think about it that way," Joy admitted finally, her voice trembling barely louder than a whisper. "That's the problem." "Joy," Michael replied, calm but cutting, each word sharp with restrained anger. "You didn't think. You saw a chance for controversy, for a headline, and you took it. You didn't stop to consider the people whose lives depend on the work we're doing." The studio was silent as he stood, the movement deliberate and slow. Instead of settling back into his chair, Michael reached for his jacket. That single gesture said everything. This interview was over. "Michael, wait," Whoopi said quickly, alarmed. "You don't have to leave. We can still talk about your foundation, the new research." He paused mid-motion, meeting her eyes with a softness that made clear she wasn't the target of his anger. "Whoopi, you've always treated me with kindness and respect, but I can't sit here and pretend that what just happened is okay." Then he turned toward the audience, not to the hosts, not to the cameras, but to the people watching, both in the studio and at home. His voice, though quiet, carried unmistakable weight. "To everyone watching," he began, "the work we do at the Michael J. Fox Foundation isn't about me. It's about the scientists who devote their lives to finding answers. It's about the patients who join clinical trials knowing they might not benefit, but hoping they can help someone else. It's about the caregivers who sacrifice everything to support the people they love." The first ripple of applause was hesitant, one pair of hands then another, but it spread quickly. Within seconds, the room erupted into a full standing ovation. People rose from their seats, clapping hard and long, their approval echoing through the studio. Joy sat frozen, pale, staring at her notes as the sound built around her. The other hosts clapped politely, faces tense, their eyes avoiding hers. The message was unmistakable. The room had chosen a side. When the applause began to fade, Michael's voice rose again, steady and clear. "The real tragedy," he said, "is that we had the chance to talk about hope, about the research that could change lives, about the possibility of a world without Parkinson's. Instead, we wasted it on manufactured conflict." He turned toward Joy, locking eyes with her one final time. "For 30 years I've lived with this disease. For 25 I've worked to make sure others don't have to. I've shared my life publicly, my failures, my fears, my worst moments, because I believe that honesty can make a difference, that it can inspire change." Joy's lips parted, her confidence gone. "Michael, I'm sorry if I offended you." He shook his head slowly. "If, Joy? You did offend me. You offended millions of people living with this disease. You offended the researchers who've dedicated their lives to finding a cure. You offended the basic decency that should exist between human beings." The studio fell silent again. Michael took a few steps toward the exit, then stopped and turned back one last time. His voice softened, but the disappointment in it was deeper than any anger could have been. "You know what's really sad?" he said. "I came here excited to share good news about new trials, real breakthroughs, things that could change everything for people like me. That's what today should have been about. But instead we turned it into this, a spectacle. And the people who needed hope the most lost it." He adjusted his jacket, gave a small nod to the audience, and walked off the set. He didn't look back. Behind him the applause swelled again, not loud and chaotic this time, but steady, deliberate, filled with admiration. He left the stage with his dignity intact, his message delivered, his composure unbroken. Joy sat motionless, her eyes unfocused, as the cameras kept rolling. The other hosts exchanged uncertain looks. The control room whispered frantically in headsets, trying to decide whether to cut to commercial. Within hours, clips of the confrontation would spread across social media. Within a day, it would dominate every headline. Joy Behar, who had once believed she was leading a tough interview, would find herself the center of a storm of outrage, accused not of journalism, but of cruelty, and Michael J. Fox. He became once again the embodiment of grace under fire. The man who'd spent decades teaching the world about courage had delivered his most powerful lesson yet, that walking away with integrity is stronger than staying to argue, proved that real strength isn't loud. It doesn't humiliate or attack. It stands tall, speaks truth, and leaves when the conversation no longer deserves its presence. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to be part of someone else's ugliness.